should we start? Hey everybody.
Hello.
Welcome to our panel on creating and writing and making kids comics. We're all people who create and write and make kids comics actually get paid for it occasionally. It is a business, and actually it's kind of growing. Should we do a really quick introduction? I'm Edmund. I write and create kids comics. I write a lot of stuff. Yeah.
He's a writer, as you can tell.
I do a lot of writing for a company called Silver Dragon Books, which is a kind of part of Zenoscope, but it's all that happens kids line. So I write on a series called Jurassic Park 45. It's called New Hollows. I've done some stuff for Discovery Channel, blah 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 blah. And I'm writing some animation now too. So anyways.
Awesome.
LeFavi.
Hello.
Yes.
I'm Joe LeFavi. Yes. That is becoming my introduction now. I'm apparently a Muppet. I worked at the Genetics Company for a while. I was their editorial director at for the publishing division, which I had the privilege to work with just about everybody here. And I also wrote on Fraggle Rock and worked with all of these lovely people. And it's a very charming experience, and I'm very excited to be.
The fact that Fraggle Rock is back and exists is because of this. We're very happy.
Yeah.
Paul Morrissey.
Hey, I'm Paul, and I work on kids' comics. I was an editor at Boom, where I worked on all the Disney comics that they published, including the Muppet Show comic, which is amazing. And now I'm at Archaea, and I work on Mouse Guard, which, if you guys don't know Mouse Guard, you should definitely read. And I also write. I wrote a Fraggle Rock comic, and I've done a couple of Casper comics.
Fraggle Rock.
Mouse.
Oh, Mouse Guard.
Mouse Guard.
For which you won an Eisner Award
Award-winning.
Wow.
In our industry, that's like an Oscar.
Yes.
So, Heather.
I'm Heather Nuhfer. I worked with all of these except for Neo, who I haven't worked with yet.
You will.
But worked with all of them on Fraggle Rock. I'm currently writing a whole bunch of Strawberry Shortcake comic books that will be coming out in Kate, as well as a few that are already out. And I am not a Muppet.
She doesn't know yet.
She has to learn on her own.
She's going to be the character in the sequel, the main character.
Right. Eventually, we'll do an intervention and and at the end, Beedle.
Yeah, I'm Tim Beedle. I've also worked with just about all these folks. I was the editor on the Fraggle Rock comic, and the current editor at Dark Crystal, which I don't know if that's still kids, but it's Henson. And then I've also written stories for Fraggle Rock, as well as for Strawberry Shortcake. And then I wrote Muppet Robin Hood with Paul as my editor for Boom. So that's me.
And you may get the impression that we all hang out and we're all friends.
We hate each other.
We all hate each other. We're on our good behavior. No, that's probably one thing to say about this particular industry. It's kind of small and we all know each other.
Yes.
We all hang out together and we do really geeky stuff, like play Dungeons and Dragons.
This is true. I'm proud.
I'm proud of it.
Seriously.
So who here, let's get an idea of what the interest is here. So anybody want to write kids comics, create kids comics? They just want to know about what we do? Yes?
I don't want to be a name dropper, but one of my good friends, Shane Houghton, who works on the Marvelous Greek Thunder comic book. The Houghton brothers have done a really good job of treating it as all ages and not talking down to kids. I grew up reading Thundercats, the comic book, Transformers, the comic book, and G.I. Joe, the comic book, which was much more enriching than the cartoons were. So I guess my question for you is, how do you approach kids material without being condescending to them being adventurous enough so that if mom or dad, if they're cool like that, also read, they're like, hey, this is pretty awesome. Like, how do you strike that balance where it really is all
It's a
ages?
good place to start. That's kind of where I was going to start anyway. How do you make kids' comics cool without talking down to kids? So, and that's really the trick, I think, in the story and the dialogue. So let's start with Joe LeFavi. I think he can answer that.
We were actually just laughing about this like 5 minutes ago. I think part of it is content, is believing that kids are ready for more mature messages and themes, but making sure that the way that you tell those stories resonate with what they know and what's familiar with them. I mean, one of my Fraggle Rock comics is called The Meaning of Life, where I literally tried to, I'm like, hey, what would be an easy story to write for Fraggle? I know, find out what the meaning of life is and show the kids. That's actually what I did, because that, for some reason, sounded like a good idea at the time. And it ended up working out. Like, it ended up being one of the most happiest times of my life, being a part of that story, because kids are intelligent, and kids can be challenged, and kids are looking at the world, asking tons of questions, and no one has the guts to give them answers and to challenge them to find answers on their own. And I think it really comes down to believing in their ability to look at the world and understand it and comprehend it and find out those answers, that as long as you put them in the right scenario, to say, here are the tools at your disposal, here is a great question, here's a quest for you to go on yourself and find that answer for yourself, define your own answer. I feel like, to me, you can have a kid experience a much more complex story and personal experience that way if you just believe that they have the courage and the intelligence to make it the rest of the way, if that makes any sense.
Wow. I don't know.
I think that's true for a certain age group, like 7 to 12. I think that's true, to have them kind of read material that might be more challenging. It's always fun, like, you know, I go back and read stuff that I read when I was a kid, and when you do that, you discover things that you didn't understand when you were a kid. I think that's sort of for me, the kind of the benchmark. But anything younger than that, I guess there are different rules for the under 7.
Yeah.
But
well, I still feel like having the guts to have a message, you know, to not just be spectacle and like, I fell on something and look at things exploding, to actually have something to say that can resonate with them past the page. I think that I think that you can do that with PBS. You know, you can do that with younger content and still make sure the message makes sense and it actually applies to their immediate life, or at least it equips them with a question that they can ask the people around them. But yeah, there's certainly a level of complexity. But I don't know, I always feel like kids' comics don't take enough responsibility for being a storyteller in their lives and trying to shape what their perspective is on the rest of the world.
Now, along with what you're saying, now do you make a distinction between moral challenges versus intellectual challenges?
I think both are equally valuable. Yeah, I think that, to me personally, not to just ramble on forever, I'm the most caffeinated on the team.
I think that's a good question for some of the people that wrote the Fraggle Rock comics, myself included. But you know, all of those stories have a little bit of a moral in them. So yeah, so Tim and Heather, how did you guys kind of embed that moral into the story and make it a fun story?
Well, I'll let Heather answer the question, but I want to set up why I'm letting her answer, because for people who haven't read, Heather had possibly the biggest challenge on Fraggle Rock, in that she wrote. She was. I should also back up a little bit and say this was her first comics project, period, and she had the challenge of writing the first Fraggle Rock story that had been written since the show went off the air. So how many years was that, Joe? First Fraggle Rock story?
Well, around 25.
Around 25 years. And so a lot of pressure and a lot of eyeballs on this story, because the Jim Henson Company obviously wanted to come back with a bang, and it was really important that they came back the right way. And that was, Joe was the editorial director there at the time, so I was editing the book, but everything was being approved by Joe, so Joe and I were working pretty closely on it. And we talked a lot about what do we want this to say, how do we balance that, and that was one of the things I came back and had to tell Heather was this story needs to reintroduce these characters for new readers. It needs to tell people who've never seen Fraggle Rock before who all these guys are. and it needs to tell some sort of lesson. So, and it needs to be entertaining. No pressure. And so Heather, yeah,
How did you do it?
There's a lot of crying involved. No, it was completely thrilling and horrifying simultaneously. I was really excited to do it, really eager to work in comics, and I found out the news and did a really wonderful dance of joy, and then immediately panicked and fell on the floor. But after that, I really just got into thinking about the kind of stories that I like to hear, and the kind of stories that I would want kids that I know to read. And also, a lot of my friends have kids, and I know they're going to be reading that story 7,000 times in a row. And so what I just did is wrote a story I would enjoy and made sure there were a couple, new words in it that would challenge the kids to be like, hey, what does that word mean? And make sure there's a good moral backing in it. Because I'm with Joe in that I want to read something and take something from it, not just read something and be like, oh, that was really pretty, or that there's a lot of things exploding there. You want to have something that you read and you remember later, or you want to read it to other people, and so the challenge is coming up with a good story that resonates without shoving something down anybody's throat.
And it was a challenge. I remember you and I those were my notes to you. Was I was like, you're being a little too heavy with the message.
Yes.
Let's scale it back a little bit, like that. Because I had very few notes for Heather for her first script ever. It was like pretty much a slam dunk. But I remember that was what we had. That was what we did have to finesse a bit. Was how much message.
Yeah, and I think there's good. You have to have that balance of having, your writing, and then having really good editors like Tim and Joe who care about the property and want the same things you do. So there's always a way to balance out and make sure the right message is getting out there. So I think if you have good teamwork. Can we have a moral for the panel?
Yes.
Teamwork.
Creating comics is definitely it's a team effort, and like she's saying, taking notes from your editor and not taking notes personally.
Yes.
So, which is it's a hard thing for I think some creators to do. They turn in something to get notes back, and it's like it's almost offensive or something. And you have to be able to take those notes and figure out how to digest them and make them your own, and not fire back a like, "What are you crazy?" response, because I've seen those so many times.
My mom thinks this is brilliant.
And then the worst thing you've done is suddenly you're difficult to work with. And then you might not get hired again. So if you want to continue to get hired, definitely be cooperative. So.
You deal with properties that already exist. I think a lot of us here would love to know about properties that don't exist. Let's say you either have a lot of money or you just have something that inspires you to want to create something new. So where would you begin? A new kids' property.
Okay, so you want to create a brand new kids' property.
To jump in.
An independent comic.
I'll start.
I'll just talk really quickly about Mouse Guard, which is Mouse Guard is sort of the all ages flagship title at Archaea, created by David Peterson, who writes and draws it, and
the nicest person ever.
and it's just an amazing book. And when I first read it before I was working at Archaea, my first thought was, this reminds me of something that I read when I was a kid. And I actually thought that it might have been something that was really old that I had never read, but it just had this kind of timeless quality to it. And I think for David, I don't think David sets out to write something for kids. I think that this is his vision, and it's something that he really wanted to tell, this kind of epic story with mice who have swords and fight, badgers and owls, and it just happens to be an all ages property. I don't think that he really kind of ruminated on how can I tell an all ages property. It's just the story that he wanted to tell.
I feel like going out and trying to write an all ages comic is the wrong way to go about it.
Talk a little about his origin and how Mouse Guard happened.
I wish,
because that was really his first thing.
Yeah.
So he was a guy with an idea.
I know that he started kind of noodling around the idea when he was in college, and he went to school for printmaking actually, but I don't really know exactly what the genesis was, but if anyone
I
else...
believe he went to a Comic Con, it's met Steve Christie, and he was just sort of exhibiting his stuff in Artist Alley. And Steve saw it and thought there's something cool
Steve
here.
Christie is the editor-in-chief of Archaea, the publisher that puts it out.
It would have been Mark Smiley.
Right.
Yeah, it's one of the things that you have to get the stuff out there. You know, like he was at conventions with a table, small as it was, just sharing his stuff. He had a blog online sharing artwork and sharing stories. That it wasn't about a business model of how do I make money off of this. It's how do I get this into the hands of enough people as possible who would actually genuinely connect with this. And then encouraging them to talk on your behalf and get more people. And if anyone talks to you, have an actual conversation with them and make sure that they really do believe in you as a creator. And it is building that community. It's very much a community effort in making sure that you can support. Kids Comics, it's a rising tide. We all help one another because we all believe in one another. And there are so few of us who are truly, genuinely committed to making quality work in this genre. And so it is about, if you have a new idea, talk about it. Share it, put it online, do anything you possibly can to make sure that you are telling that story to as many people as you feel would connect to it.
I think webcomics really have a way to kind of open up, readership that didn't really exist before, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think what a lot of this is kind of getting around is there aren't very many publishers out there that have an active interest in developing a lot of kids comics. There are ones that will do it. Archaea will do it. They have a new kids comic coming out this year called Cowboy, which is creator owned. He came up with it. And then I know Boom is still publishing kids books, and so is Ape, although I think they're just doing brand licensed ones. So it's there are a few that will, but that's not their number one priority. There aren't publishers out there that are like, yes, we're just going to do kids books, and we're, unfortunately, I was hoping maybe Scholastic might have become that, but they seem to have scaled it back a bit, and you kind of need an agent, and for someone who's just wanting to start and kind of get in, there are publishers like Archaea, but I think, like what Paul said, the web is a good outlet, and like what Joe said, just getting your stuff out there. The reality is, I think for the biggest successes, they kind of start, like on your own, whether it's through self-publishing, whether it's through starting a Kickstarter campaign, if you can do that, or just putting it up on the web. And then, once you've demonstrated that there is some interest in it, you can then maybe take that to publishers and they're going to be more interested in it.
Yeah. And make sure you're not standing alone. You don't have to have the whole table to your one story. Get a couple people to chip in and have a couple different people displaying their work. No one is your competition in this genre. It's a comic. I'm going to read 22 pages or 120 pages, then I'm going to read 120 more from somebody else. There's no reason why both of you can't succeed. And more than likely, if I'm picking up that comic, it's because I like this type of story. So that it actually would help you to build some people behind you and make sure that there's enough people talking about you to acquire. Right. Yeah.
I just kind of have a question a little bit about, like, well, you put it out there, it's like, there's sort of intellectual property. How do you prove that it was yours once you put it out there and it's gone out there? Mouse Guard, he put it out there for everybody. How did he prove that somebody else come along and say, well, I invented that, or that was my creation? I'm just curious about once you...
I assume that David at some point filed for the copyright for that property, which is a really easy thing to do. You just go to you can go to the website for the copyright office, and then you mail it in, and then they send you a certificate that says that...
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, if you have a really unique idea and you think it really would hit, you would want to probably try to protect yourself a little bit before you send it out to the whole world.
Yeah,
it's just
you can also register stuff through the Writers Guild website. Mm-hmm. You make it all up into a document, like submit it as a PDF. It's $20. Yeah. And it proves a date of creation.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Before you send it out there, or you can't never get it back.
Protect your idea.
You do want to, 9/10 of copyright law is fair use. And so if it's out there in the world and you can prove a certain day that you were doing it and using it and out there championing it before the other people, that's 9/10 of law. And so when it comes to those kind of arguments, it's who is doing it first. And so I would do your research as well, because you should look in the marketplace and see what kind of people are telling your type of story. Because it's very possible if you're doing, space reindeer, maybe someone's doing space, something else that looks like reindeer, space jackalopes, sure that you do stand apart in the marketplace. But then once you do, there has to be a certain point where you're just okay getting it out there. That you have to throw caution to the wind. You have to make sure that people are knowing that your story exists and that you're telling your story. Otherwise, then you're not a storyteller.
Right.
It's really about the storytelling too, because everyone in this room could have the exact same idea. It's really how you tell that story that makes it unique.
Yeah, the execution of an idea is what you can actually own,
Very
more than
much
just
so.
an idea. Because I don't know how many times I've had like, oh, this brilliant idea, and then I Google around and find it exists. You know,
Yeah.
somebody's already got a graphic novel out, and you know, it's already been
Well, and
auctioned. You know?
That kind of brought up a question that came to mind for me because growing up in 25 years ago for Fraggle Rock, boy, do I feel old.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's okay.
man.
Don't worry.
That cannot fit 25
I
years
met
ago.
4 years ago.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's more
I'm sorry, I
accurate.
just check.
Thank you.
But I mean, the only comic I remember reading as a young girl was, you know, Archie. So now with the web, the YouTube, you know, how do you not compete? Because you said it's not really competition, but printed comics versus web comics versus everything that's out there that you don't even know where it's coming from a parent standpoint. I don't know what, you know, how to direct them exactly where they can go and not go. And
I've been doing a lot of studying as far as self-publishing goes, because 2 of the top bestsellers last year were self-published works that they didn't have publishers put behind them. These are prose novels, not comics. And a lot of it is about self-promotion. A lot of it is going to conventions and such, and it's also about finding opinion leaders that do a lot of research about certain websites or critics who review work like yours and send it to them and say, hey, would you mind reviewing my work? Because if you get a positive review, suddenly sales boost, suddenly other people want to read your stuff, suddenly another critic wants to read it, and it is very much a proactive effort. Like, you have to go out and do the research and find out who needs to know about your work and then make sure they do, and if they don't and they're not willing to listen, violently shake them until they do. And that, a lot of it is that. It is a lot of self-promotion and getting out there, but it is possible.
But are you asking, like, how do you find material that's appropriate for your
well, there's a little bit of both. I mean, I kind of threw a lot out in that one question because it was like, now that is so much easier than years ago where you had to just kind of know who to talk to. Now you can do a search and say, oh, I could email my stuff to this guy. So that does make it a much broader range of people submitting. So within that question, then how do we know what content it really is kids and what content looks like kids? Very deceiving, and then all of a sudden, not so much. I have to read everything.
I was reading Grimm fairy tales to my little girl
Okay, flipping through.
Yeah. You know, unfortunately, I think the comic book audience has sort of been fractured.
Yes.
And when, you know, even when we were younger, all of us could pick up a Marvel comic and we could read it and it would be fine. But now there's kind of different markets. There's a market for people that are our age and older who like stuff that's a little bit more adult, and then there's a market for the kids.
Yeah.
And then the publishers have tried to, you know, capitalize on both. Marvel has their main titles. They have their Ultimates title, which is a little bit more, you know, adult oriented, and then they have their. Do they still do Marvel Adventures? Which is a little bit younger, but
Yeah.
It's Marvel Illustrated at this point.
is that what it is?
Well, I think as a parent, you just look at your stuff.
Yeah, you
Open it up and look at it. You
It's
know?
branding too. Like, you know, Boom says Kaboom. You know, Viz has Viz Kids.
Right.
You know, there's certain imprints that deal only in kids.
So getting to know that and just getting familiar with again with the web, it's a little bit harder, you know, because they can just search it. But that's with everything. So
I think it's also, it's not just the official branding of those books, but it's also the just the arts. People are aware that the art style is going to be a little bit different depending on the age group, and I actually think kids do a really good job of sort of policing that on their own.
it's true.
And I think that they are drawn to the things that are specifically designed to appeal to them.
They're more, yeah, that's true.
If you're
That's
talking
true.
about traditional comics too, I would also say use your local comic shop as a resource. I mean, you know, if you have a great local shop, like those, they're, I mean, it's a one independent sales, you know, I mean, where independent sales is still dominant. is in comics. These are all basically mom and pop businesses, and they're more than willing, at least if they're a good shop, they're more than willing to talk to you, and if you have concerns, say, well, this one might be good for your daughter or your son, and also order stuff if they don't have it. You know, if they know there's an interest there. Like if someone really loves, superheroes, well, Marvel and DC do both put out superhero comics for kids. They may not keep them on their shelves that regularly, but if they know your son is a big Spider-Man fan, they might get those into them. So.
Have you two read Smile by any chance? It's a Scholastic graphic novel that's it's really good, and you guys would love it. So pick up Smile.
Did you write Smile?
I did not. I did not write it. It's fantastic.
What is it about?
It's actually an autobiographical story that's done as a graphic novel, and it's about a girl who, I think she's probably in 8th grade, and it's about her kind of horrible experience getting all this kind of dental work done. And it's sort of
I've heard of it.
It's really good.